Thank you, Brian. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rubén Hernández León, Director of the Latin American Institute at UCLA, also Professor of Sociology. And I am very pleased to welcome all of you to this event of the Pacific World Research Network. This is an initiative that we launched recently, last year, between the Latin American Institute, the Center for Southeast Asian Studies, and the Asia Pacific Center to study the connections, historical and contemporary, between Asia and Latin America. Those connections from the point of view of the goals of this initiative, of this research network, include economic exchanges, migration, and culture. So it is so thank you very much to our partnering centers here. And it's my distinct pleasure today to welcome a visiting scholar at the UCLA Latin American Institute, Rubens Marcelo de Campos Pinto, who is a doctoral student at the University of Sao Paulo. Again, he is visiting the LAI at UCLA, and he is presenting today his research entitled A Comparative Study Between Brazil and China, Foreign Direct Investment, Urbanization, and Infrastructure in the 21st Century. Rubens will go for about 30 to 40 minutes in his presentation. He will share the presentation shortly. And after he finishes, we are going to have a discussion. So feel free to use the Q&A function of the webinar to raise questions to our presenter today. So once again, Rubens, thank you for your willingness to participate in this research network and to present your work. And we're very pleased to have you here in Los Angeles and at UCLA and at the Latin American Institute. Take it away.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Brian, and the Latin American Institute. Thank you, Professor Rubén. I will start my presentation. Hello, everyone. My name is Rubens, and I will present my research, a comparative study between Brazil and China, foreign direct investment, urbanization and infrastructure in the 21st century. First of all, I would like to thank the Professor Rubén Hernández León for the opportunity and the Latin American Institutes at UCLA. This research is part of PhD in progress, so all comments, critics, and suggestions are welcome. This presentation has 6 parts: an introduction composed by my background in an overview of the research, theory, method, empirical data, discussion, and a brief summary of the work. So, my name is Rubens Marcelo de Campos Pinto, and I'm from Brazil. I was born and raised in Sao Paulo. My bachelor was in geography at the University of Sao Paulo, and my master's in human geography in the same university. In my master's, I studied industrialization and urbanization, and my advisor was Professor Cesar Ricardo Simone Santos. Currently, I'm a PhD student at the same university, and my advisor is, again, Professor Cesar. I was a geography teacher in a public school in Brazil, where I got a license for 2 years to come to UCLA, for example. And I'm a visiting graduate researcher at Latin American Institute, UCLA, and my supervisor is Professor Rubén Hernández León. This research tries to understand the change in the relations between Brazil and China, considering after 2008 crisis, considering the theory of planetary urbanization proposed by authors such as Neil Brennan and Christopher Schmidt. This theory tries to update the idea of generalization of urbanization after 1970s, as proposed by Henri Lefebvre. It stands out here the new role of China, especially considering the Belt and Road Initiative. It's important to consider the relation between infrastructure and urbanization and the new elements brought by China in the global urbanization. The objective of this is to identify new trends in urbanization, analyzing accumulation of capital and political power. Here, the Chinese state is considered a new important player in Brazilian territory. Besides, the objective is also to critically review some ideas such as deconcentration, decentralization, and deindustrialization. I believe that these ideas in the new liberal context, despite the narrative of democratization of space by distributing the productive factors, played a role in expanding the spaces of accumulation, concentrated, centralized, and unequally industrialized. Theory. Let's talk about theories, authors, and concepts that are referenced for me here. In this research, I tried to dialogue with distinctive traditions in urban studies and contemporary political economy. The idea of planetary urbanization as an update of some of the hypotheses left by Lefebvre in the 60s and in the 70s is important reference here. Is one important reference here. Authors such as Neil Brennan and Christian Schmidt will be considered. The critics of neoliberal urbanism are important here regarding the impact of market reforms in Brazil and China. Authors such as Jane Pack, Jun Zhang, and Neil Brennan are part of the discussion. Studies on financialization made by François Chernet, Pierre Salama, and Leda Paulani will be considered too. Theories on and research related to circuits of capital, infrastructure, and built environment proposed by David Harvey, Célio Atuca, Sandra Lencioni, Deborah Werner, and Carlos Brandão can be related here. And at the same time, I will consider different perspectives about Chinese urbanization proposed by George Lin, Fulong, Yao Chengxing, Chen Jinghe, Yinhua Chu, Anthony Gar-Ongie, among others. In Brazilian urbanization, it will be important authors such as Ana Fanny Santos Carlos, Sandra Lencioni, César Ricardo Simone Santos, Francisco de Oliveira, José de Souza Martins, Raquel Ronick, Eduardo Marques, Mariana Pix, Roberto Luiz de Montemor, among others. Regarding the concepts, the main concept to be problematized here is infrastructure. I will consider the concepts of fixed capital and built environment to analyze the distinctive characteristics of infrastructure. Also, the proposal of the circuit of capital, especially here, primary circuits, the whole cycle of capital considering production and circulation, the secondary circuit, construction sector, physical infrastructure and built environment, and tertiary circuit, the social infrastructure will be important here, especially the secondary circuits. The relation between the expansion of secondary circuits in moments of overaccumulation crisis will be investigated in the cases of Brazil and China. At the same time, the long-term characteristics of these enterprises, as well as role of states in the financial capital, need to be highlighted. The main objective is to understand how these processes are related to urbanization. So let's talk about methods.
I'm sorry, Rubens. Are you advancing through your slideshow? Because we're only seeing the initial slide here.
Oh my, really? I am advanced.
Yeah, you might want to go ahead and stop your screen share. And since you're in the office next to me, I will come help you fix it.
Okay.
Sorry, everybody, we're trying to fix this technical glitch, and hopefully we'll be able to solve it quickly. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, I don't see anything here.
Okay. So I'm gonna start again. We had some technical problems. Okay. So let me know if you can see the transitions in my slides and if everything is okay. So
You can start sharing where you were at. It's okay. You don't have to repeat everything. So,
okay.
you know, for the purposes of time and experience, you can just where you were. It's completely fine. Yeah.
But let me see. It's not working, my transition.
você sente?
Okay. So yeah, okay. I presented my background in an overview of my research, and now, so my main point here is the changes in the relations between Brazil and China after 2008 crisis, and I will review some ideas as deconcentration, decentralization, and deindustrialization. So I was talking about some theoretical reference, like the neo-Lefebvrean planetary urbanization, neoliberal urbanism, financialization, the circuits of capital, in some authors studying Chinese and Brazilian urbanization. These are my main theoretical references here. My main concept is infrastructure, and I will consider the concepts of fixed capital and the built environment to analyze distinctive characteristics of infrastructure. Also, the proposal of circuits of capital, the primary, secondary, and tertiary circuits, the whole cycle of the capital, considering production and circulation is the primary circuit. But what is interesting for me here is especially the secondary circuit related to physical infrastructure, built environments, and construction. The relation between the expansion of the secondary circuits in moments of overaccumulation crisis will be investigated in the cases of Brazil and China. And at the same time, the long-term characteristics of this enterprise, as well as the role of state in the financial capital, need to be highlighted. The main objective is to understand how these processes are related to urbanization. Method. I'm using a comparative method here. The comparison will be done between Brazil and China during 2000-2023 period. The idea is to consider the census between 2000 and 2020. The Brazilian census will be published just in 2023. This is why I'm not using 2020 as a reference here. The scale used is national scale, focusing on the micro concentrations. And the objective of this comparison is to discover new trends in Brazilian, Chinese, and global urbanization by identifying and analyzing similarities, differences, and especially relations between the two processes of urbanization. The perspective, therefore, is centered in the urban processes, considering indicators such as population, GDP, FDI, market reforms, infrastructure projects, and fixed gross capital formation among others. Considering the recent discussion in the comparative studies, I will talk about some currents and sources of data. Considering the recent discussion in the comparative urban studies, I dialogue with currents such as the New Lefebvrian, especially with Neil Brenner, and critics of neoliberal urbanism proposed by Genpack, debating with the post-colonial critics made by Jennifer Robinson. And I try to analyze the strategies, the different strategies of comparison, such as universalizing, individualizing, encompassing, and the proposal of incorporated comparison of Philip McMichael and variation finding. The idea is to discuss weaknesses and strengths of each one, and the proposal is to dialogue more deeply with the New Lefebvrian and critics of neoliberal urbanism and the incorporated comparison strategy. The main sources of data here are the Ministry of Commerce and People's Republic of China, Instituto Brasileiro de Geografia e Estatística from Brazil, Red Académica de América Latina y el Caribe sobre China, em Conselho Empresarial Brasil-China. Let's talk now about empirical data in Brazil and China between 2000 and 2023. And I will talk about China, Brazil, and some initial relations. I will present China and Brazil separately due to the step of the research where I am now. So firstly, China. I will consider three criteria in here: urbanization, accumulation of capital, and political power. So if we look at China's recent urbanization process, we see some connections with changes in the government policies to urbanization in the 1980s and 1990s. And some authors highlight, for example, the change in the definition of city in the so-called decentralization process, as well as the role of local governments in economic development. More recently, the new urbanization plan seems to embody the new conceptions of urbanization. The category of city clusters or mega regions started to be used by governments and planners. In the first decades of the 21st century, China experienced a real estate boom as well as a construction boom. Here, the old idea of extending the urban concentrations from the east coast to the center and the west of the country gained new shapes. And the Belt and Road Initiative seems to express the externalization of this process. Here, the infrastructure fulfills an important role both in the economic development and in the urbanization process. Some authors seek a relation between overaccumulation crisis and urbanization using the concepts of secondary circuit of capital. In this case here, the 2008 crisis. Accumulation of capital. One remarkable moment in the periodization of Chinese capital accumulation was the entry in the World Trade Organization, the beginning of 21st century. The market reforms since 1978 changed the GDP structure, opening the country to foreign direct investment and shaped the states and its role in the development. There is a discussion about the developmental stage in Asia and in China and how these states deal with market reforms such as deregulation, liberalization, and privatization. Stand out here the passage from in-war FDI in China and the role of foreign corporations in Chinese territory to out-war FDI, Chinese FDI, in the role of Chinese corporations overseas. Another important aspect of Chinese contemporary development is the role played by the work in the economic developments in urban trends, especially strikes and unionization in the Western countries. It's important here to consider the control of work and the strategic view of urban centers by the governments. Besides, the political transitions give us more elements about the relation between urban centers and geopolitics. Some authors consider that the Xi Jinping government represents a new moment in recent Chinese urban trends. For example, changing the relationship between decentralization and centralization. So let's see the same periods and the same criteria in Brazil. Considering urbanization, accumulation of capital, and political power. So Brazil experienced huge territorial and urban change after Lula's election in 2003. Big projects such as Programa de Aceleração do Crescimento, infrastructure projects to stimulate economic growth, and Programa Minha Casa Minha Vida, a housing program, had a huge impact in the real estate market and the construction sector. Constructors such as OAS, Odebrecht, and Camargo Correia became big agents in Brazilian territory. Brazil experienced a real estate boom and a strong verticalization process in the period. At the same time, mega regions, due to the connection between large urban centers by infrastructure, started to be a reality. Therefore, it's possible to understand some trends in Brazilian recent development by analyzing large infrastructure projects. Here also the old idea of moving the development from the East Coast to the center and the west of the country and expanding the built environment can be related to the secondary circuit of capital and the big recent movements in Brazilian economy. Accumulation of capital. Brazil experienced after 1990s a strong process of market reforms, liberalization, deregulation, and especially privatization, which shaped the Brazilian state and its role in urbanization. The GDP structure saw an increase in the service sector and a decrease in the industrial sector in the last decades. Considering market reforms, the finance capital entered in the Brazilian economy in general and in the real estate markets and infrastructure. At the same time, inward foreign direct investment was encouraged and foreign companies had an even bigger impact in Brazilian territory. The great discussion in the last decades was what the workers' parties governments mean in regard to the model of development. Some consider a new developmental government, other ones consider an ordinary new liberal government. The current Lula government will bring new perspective to this debate. The recent political transitions in Brazil had a huge impact in Brazilian development. Since 2003, Brazil had 4 governments from Workers' Party, Lula, and Dilma Rousseff, that was impeached in 2016. Michel Temer became president, and after this, Jair Bolsonaro was elected, and now Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva was re-elected. The new Lula government is an important part of Brazilian recent development and will bring us new insights. The idea of urban deconcentration or decentralization started during the old developmental stage in Brazil in the first half of the 20th century and gained more political and geopolitical meaning during the military regimes. The new liberal times accelerated the process of deconcentration and decentralization. Part of the narrative was to democratize the space. However, here, the organization of workers was important. The massive strikes in the metropolitan region of Sao Paulo in the 1980s represented a remarkable moment in this debate. The unionization and the strikes played an important role in the seek for new spaces of accumulation. The main objective was escape from the unions and to pay less salaries and expand the spaces of accumulation. So let's see some initial relations between these two processes. Considering accumulation of capital, urbanization, and political power. One of the most recognized relations between Brazil and China regarding to accumulation of capital is trade relations. Here we can see the origins of Brazilian exports from 2000 to 2020. China is the red line. As we can see, China became the main origin of Brazil, the main country to import Brazilian products. We can see that after 2008, an important increase in this trend. If we consider Brazilian imports, we can see United States in the blue line and China in the red line in a great competition. But China became the main trade partner of Brazil, and trade relations are maybe the most recognized topic here. Especially agricultural products. Brazil export agricultural products like soybean and raw materials, especially iron ore. But however, the Chinese foreign direct investments in Brazil has been demonstrating many interesting things, new things about this relation. Investments, for example, in industry show a deeper relation between the two countries. Chinese companies like BYD and Chery are producing automobiles in Brazil. Stand out here the fact that around 80% of the Chinese investments in Brazil were made by the states. That is public investment. This is different if you consider US foreign direct investment in Brazil or European FDI. Chinese companies started to invest in the built environments in Brazil, such as transportation sector and urban mobility. For example, the BYD companies, for instance, is producing electric buses in Brazil and selling them to different municipal governments. Chinese participation in infrastructure projects in Brazil need to be highlighted here, such as, for example, line powers. Here we have an example of a huge line power being built by China in Brazil, connecting the states of Pará and Sao Paulo. As we can see, this is the Belo Monte line power. As we can see here, it crosses like a lot of different regions in Brazil, the north region, the center-west region, and the southeast region. Besides, China is building a lot of subways in cities as Sao Paulo, for example. And there is a project to build Chinatown in Sao Paulo, the first Chinatown in Latin America and the Caribbean, for example, and a project associated with the smart cities. So if you consider political power, the first Lula's governments were associated with the BRICS relations and Global South cooperation, as well as Dilma Rousseff's governments. And at the same time, Xi Jinping in China represents a new moment in Chinese recent development. So the relations between the two governments is going to be different, because now it's the first time As once this research is a work in progress, I will present some open questions. So firstly, there is an opportunity to contribute to the recent discussions about planetary urbanization, considering the realities of Global South and the East, and especially the relationship between these two regions. Secondly, it's possible to discuss the idea of secondary circuits. Should it be considered a secondary circuit, for example, or we should can you hear me?
I think that the image and sound froze for a moment. So we'll just bear with us and we'll see how we can proceed. Brian?
Yeah, I got kicked off for a moment as well. I think it's Wi-Fi issues on campus today.
Okay. Just bear with us. We'll try to solve this issue.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Maybe we had some connection problems. Let me see.
You were in the open questions part.
Okay. Thank you. So I was talking about new ideas that we can bring to the idea of planetary urbanizations, considering the Global South and the East, and what we can consider, what we can say about secondary circuits, considering the relationship between the built environment in the whole cycle of capital and the neoliberal urbanism after 2008 crisis. So another topic is what does mean the Chinese externalization in relation with regions such as Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean, and what's the role of financialization in topics related to the built environment, for example, real estate market, construction, and infrastructure. Now I will just briefly summarize the ideas of the presentation, and we can go to the questions and answers. So the proposal here is to understand Brazilian urban trends and Chinese urban trends, both as part of the planetary urbanization and as related process. The Belt and Road Initiative, as well as the Chinese state, are fundamental parts of this discussion. The idea is to review processes such as deconcentration, decentralization, and the industrialization after 2008 crisis, and the new elements in the relation between the two countries. So thank you for your attention. This is my email if you want to send me a message, and thank you, Professor Ruben and Brian Pitts, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Rubens, and thank you all, and apologies for the disruptions that we had. This is something that happens once in a while, and but this is actually a moment to raise some questions for our speaker. We actually already have one. I'm going to read it out loud for everybody's benefit, and it goes, this is about a small point you mentioned, but can you expand on the building of a Chinatown in Sao Paulo? Where will it be? Who is involved? And are there any stated goals with creating one?
Oh, great question. The Chinatown project in São Paulo is a project in the municipality, in the legislative chamber in São Paulo. The Ibrachina is a cultural association in São Paulo. They presented a project to the municipal government in São Paulo, and this project is being analyzed. The idea is to launch this project in next year, when Brazil-China relations will, maybe the anniversary of Brazil-China relations is in 2024, maybe 50 years of relation between the countries. So the area is in downtown area, is renovating projects like to rebuild parts of the downtown, especially close to the municipal markets, the Mercado Municipal in São Paulo. In that area, we have a lot of, we have a huge Chinese community living in that area. In São Paulo, we have the neighborhood called Liberdade, where a Japanese community built a Japanese neighborhood, and a lot of Chinese people started to live in this place. So now it's like a Asian neighborhood in São Paulo. So the idea is to separate the Chinese community in a new neighborhood and not being more in Liberdade, and build a specific Chinese neighborhood in the city. This market, Mercado Municipal in São Paulo, in this area we have some huge commercial centers like Santa Efigênia and Braz, that are when we can see a lot of Chinese commerciants there. So the project is being discussed, and this cultural Chinese association is trying to connect some ideas from smart cities. It's a project that maybe in the future we will see results. It's in the initial step.
Thank you, Rubens, and I invite members of the audience to pose some questions using the Q&A function of the webinar. In the meantime, Rubens, while we get other questions from members of the audience, I wanted to ask you if the government of Jair Bolsonaro somehow change or altered in some way these series of exchanges and relations. And I think you mentioned some sort of fundamental things, right? China buys or purchases a lot of, primary goods from Brazil, and then Brazil is essentially the recipient of Chinese capital. A lot of it in the form or through state enterprises, right, which are building manufactured goods, but also developing infrastructure in Brazil. So in other words, do the ideological and political sign of Brazilian government change the course of these relations, or not so much?
I think so. Yeah. If you consider the stronger moments in this relationship was during the Workers' Party government. So especially Lula, but maybe during the Dilma governments after 2010, the relation increased. If you see, for example, trade relations, even during the Bolsonaro government, the trade relations strengthened. Like we can see like an increase in the relation between the two countries. But if we consider some foreign direct investment in infrastructure projects, it seems like the relationship became slower during the Bolsonaro government and could be improved. And there are some expectations that now with new Lula government, we can see more infrastructure projects and more FDI. It doesn't mean that stopped relation between the countries, but it feels like could be improved, and maybe China waited some. But in the economic perspective, the relation between the countries is strong. So it's like hard one government just stop or change this relation.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else interested in posing a question for our speaker? I was also curious, Rubens, about the impact of the pandemic in this relationship, right, between China and Brazil, because I don't recall exactly if China supplied vaccines, COVID-19 vaccines to Brazil, during the pandemic. Of course, this was very important. So I'll let you answer that, and I'll read some other questions. We just got another question, but why don't you take a stab at this question, at this issue of kind of like pandemic, COVID-19 diplomacy and COVID and vaccine diplomacy, actually.
Yeah, especially in the national scale, the Brazilian president, former president Jair Bolsonaro, was against vaccination. So in saying a lot of things like racist things against Chinese people and but what happened was that different governments, state governments, cooperated with China separately. So, for example, the state of Sao Paulo developed a process, manufacturing process of vaccination using the Chinese vaccine, one Chinese vaccine. So it was a cooperation between Instituto Butantan and Sinovac, the company. So we used a lot of Chinese vaccines in Brazil due to this state, Sao Paulo state cooperation with the government. And what kept the relation between Brazil and China maybe was the role of the governments, the state governments, because in the national scale maybe we wouldn't had like vaccine until now if we waited the Brazilian national government. So even the pharmaceutical products in general, like masks or medical things, we bought a lot of products from China, and I think it's hard to see the data in this period because the global market had some atypical problems, and maybe we'll see how to consider this influence in the foreign direct investment in infrastructure projects after maybe in the next coming years.
Thank you, Rubens. My colleague Min Zhou, director of the Asia Pacific Center, asks, can you say something more about your data collection, especially on the China side? How much faith do you have for the Chinese data?
Oh yeah, the Chinese data. I try to confront the data from the Ministry of Commerce with some different international institutes. For example, the network in Mexico, the Red Latin America and the Caribbean with China, they analyze this data, and there is a Brazil-China Business Council in Brazil that try to use more specific information about the presence of Chinese companies in Brazil. So maybe the Chinese state, this network in Mexico, and this Brazilian Chamber of Commerce can maybe help me to find some difference between data in the country. I don't know if I answered the question.
Thank you, Rubens. Steve Scheibe asks, the Chinese see Brazil as a source of raw materials in an area of investment. How can Brazil take better advantage of the Chinese market and diversify its exports to China? How much can Brazil gain in tech transfer, i.e. 5G and artificial intelligence?
Oh yeah, that's a great topic. There is a great discussion about what means this cooperation between the countries. If we see from 2010 to now, the cooperation between the countries are being diversified. We can see like more and more different types of cooperation. Maybe started from just Brazil selling raw materials, and now China is investing in sectors in technology sector, for example, in energy, and in maybe there is a discussion about the implementation of 5G in Brazil, and most of companies are using products made by the Chinese development of 5G and AI. And I think maybe now with a government that is more interested in develop this cooperation, new projects can be developed in this technological area. If we consider what Brazil can gain from this relation, there's how to take advantage. For example, if you usually the countries that most invested in Brazil were European countries and United States. During the 20th century, this was common, and now maybe the competition between Chinese companies, American companies, the different governments and different types of cooperation, this can maybe Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, Global South in general, we will see more competition between these different types of investments and not just one area of influence just for one country. I don't know what are the consequences and the impacts in the future. For sure, this new moment after Lula's election will bring a different moment, but I don't know exactly what this means.
Thank you. Richard Phillips is asking, please talk more about port facilities. There are reports of massive delays in shipping the high crop outputs of soy, wheat, corn, etc. This is, I guess, a very important question because it also has to do with infrastructure and how this infrastructure facilitates or hinders the deepening of these relations, right, between China and Brazil.
Yeah, that's a very important topic. Most of the exports in Brazil are made by Santos Port in Sao Paulo. This is traditionally the most important port in Brazil. The soybean is produced in the center-west region of Brazil and mostly exported by southeast in Sao Paulo and part in the south of the country in Rio Grande do Sul, Santa Catarina, and Paraná. This route to export to China is maybe not the best route because we have the Atlantic Ocean and Africa, and the way to China is longer here. And Brazil has no access to the Pacific Ocean. There was a project proposed by China to build a rail crossing Brazil, Peru, and It's crossing all different countries in Latin America. This was not accepted, and there's a discussion about this railway. But that one important thing here to try to avoid delays and problems in the Santos port in Brazil is try to export Brazilian products by the north of the country, northern Brazil. For example, this is the short way to United States, Europe, and China by Panama Canal. So there's a project called Ferrogrão. Is a railway to connect the center-west of Brazil to the north, and a lot of different ports are being built in the north of Brazil to take advantage of these new routes. This can be a huge territorial impact in Brazil. If we can see one part of this in the state of Maranhão, where most of iron ore are being exported from the Pará state to Maranhão. So this is a new port in this state, and there are projects to improve this type of ports in Pará, and this north part of Brazil. So the infrastructure projects are probably will go in this direction to try to avoid the traditional ports like Santos and export in different routes, especially to the north.
Thank you. Professor Mincho is asking, are there significant oppositions and critiques of the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative among Brazilian politicians?
Yes, Brazil is not formally part of Belt and Road Initiative, and it's interesting if you consider the Chinese press, for example. A lot of different infrastructure projects are considered part of Belt and Road, but in Brazil, they are not considered part of this initiative. So I don't know now if with Lula government, Brazil will be formally part. In Latin America, I think most of countries signed Belt and Road Initiative, a lot of different countries. Maybe Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil didn't sign, but I think Chile signed, and a lot of different countries are formally part of Belt and Road. If the Belt and Road Initiative didn't consider Latin America in the beginning of the project, was a way to connect China to Europe, passing through Central Asia and Southeast Asia, but in Africa and Latin America entered in this project, and it's a global project now. And there are a lot of discussions about, I don't know if Brazil will be formally parts of, probably China and Brazil will build a lot of different projects, and in the China side, this is Belt and Road Initiative, and in Brazil side is not formally because of these critics and the opposition. For example, the Bolsonaro government was strongly against China, even considering xenophobic and racist arguments against China. And the far right in Brazil and the most conservative ideas are strongly opposed to China. And Lula government and the more neoliberal perspectives, not so conservative, they try to strengthen this connection with China, but maybe Belt and Road Initiative is a great controversial project in Brazil.
Thank you, Rubens. Let's see, maybe chance for one more question. No, this is Professor Schultz says interesting. Thanks a lot. And well, with that, I want to thank you, Rubens, for your presentation, and it's super interesting. Your work actually goes at the heart of the Pacific World Research Network. These are very important connections and relations, and not just between, just two countries, let's say, but also, between the sort of giants of Asia and Latin America, actually. So these have very, very important consequences for a lot of people. I want to close by once again thanking you, and I want to thank also Brian Pitts, who's the assistant director of the Latin American Institute, and his tech-savvy skills always help us navigate the problems with Wi-Fi and connectivity and other things. And I also want to thank Chase Smith, who is the research assistant for the Pacific World Research Network, and he has been helping us organize these events and maintain our connections through this network with colleagues all over the world, literally. So stay tuned, because in the spring we will have more events sponsored by the Pacific World Research Network, and on topics, once again, that shed light on the connections between Asia and Latin America. Thank you, everybody, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.